Hi everyone, welcome to day 3 of Take a Bite Out of Climate Change for our Slow Living Summit, first ever virtual summit. We're just going to give a few moments for folks to log on and get situated, and then we will start. Thank you for joining us today. We could probably start now. Great, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lissa Harris. I am the Executive Director of Strolling of the Heifers. This is our first ever virtual Slow Living Summit. I want to thank all of our speakers and everyone who helped make this possible. Our sponsors for the event are Breakthrough Beverage and Meadows Beef Farm. And today's panel is on social justice and climate change. And just to let everybody know, this panel we offered for free. We put it out there with a statement in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. We did on that Facebook post get some hateful comments that were inciting violence. And so we just want to be clear that anybody on the panel today, any of our attendees, if there are any comments or questions that are hateful in nature, that are racist in nature, or incite violence, you will be removed from the webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Jen Brandt, who is our Slow Living Summit coordinator, and she's going to tell you the lineup we have today. Take it away, Jen.
Hi, thank you so much everyone for attending. The numbers keep going up, so this is awesome. Yeah, very excited to be hosting our third day of this as well. This has been a labor of love for me. We've been organizing since last August. The greatest thing about all of our summits is that we get recommendations from other panels and other panelists to bring people on. So this is really pretty organic, the way these come together. So, you know, people decided that they wanted to work with certain groups, and, you know, we know that they're going to be a really great presentation because they are really excited about their topics and excited about talking to each other about all of these issues. I am super excited to introduce to you Conor Floyd, who is local to Brattleboro. We have Abel Luna, who is from Migrant Justice. Very excited to have him. He's a last minute panelist, but he looks very competent, so I'm very excited to hear him speak. And then Tatiana Abatemarco. Did I say it right? Did I overdo it?
I mean, you know, I'm from New Jersey, so you might have overdid it a little bit.
Okay, I got a PhD in it this morning, so in the mood for it. All right, so we will go ahead and let them just kick it off, about an hour of presentation, and then we'll do around a half an hour of Q&A afterwards. Yeah, so take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So thank you so much to Jen and to Lisa and everyone at the Slow Living Summit. As Jen said, I'm Tatiana Abatemarco, and I'm going to kind of facilitate and also be the first speaker on the panel. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay. So today's talk and panel is on food justice and climate justice. As Jen said, again, I'm being joined by Conor Floyd from Food Connects in Brattleboro and Abel Luna from Migrant Justice. And we're going to be talking about these key terms. So I wanted to start off with just what is food justice and what is climate justice? When we use the word justice, what we're trying to get at is, you know, what are the ways that we can create more equity, more fairness? What are the ways that we can orient our discussions of things like food and climate change to bring attention to the beneficiaries of the current system and who is feeling the most burden. And in an unjust system, the people who benefit don't feel as many burdens, and the people who are getting less benefits feel more burdens. And so we have that in our food system. We have that in relation to climate change as well. So where does this injustice live in the food system, and what would a just food system look like? And then in terms of climate change, who's responsible for climate change, who's benefited from climate change, who's making money off of climate change, who's feeling comfortable because of the things that are causing climate change, versus who's going to bear the brunt of these effects. So both food and climate are situations of injustice in our society, in our communities. And so we want to bring attention to that through our work. I also want to acknowledge the context that we're in. We're in a very powerful moment right now here in the United States. One aspect of the context that we're in is COVID-19, the global pandemic, which in the US again is showing us the injustice. Where are the hospitals well-funded? Where are the hospitals underfunded? Where are the political systems supporting health? Where are the political systems damaging health? Communities of color especially have been hit by COVID-19, and our panelists today are going to talk a little bit about that and in relation to their work. Again, another context is climate change. We have a global climate crisis that we're in the midst of. The effects of climate change will only be getting worse, and the real dangers of climate change are felt most by the people who have been systematically oppressed in our society and on this planet. There's a vibrant farm worker rights movement going on right now. So excited to be joined by Abel Luna and as representing Migrant Justice. So that's a huge context. And of course, right now, lastly, another piece is the movement for Black lives that we've seen protests all across the country, people standing up and saying that, you know, we want to end this, this murder of people of Black and brown skin, this militarization of police. And so it's a very exciting movement, a very powerful movement. And the vision that we all hold in this panel is for a food and climate just future where everyone has food access and human rights. And we consider our vision and what we work for to be an allyship with all of these other moments that we're in. Another thing I want to do briefly is just some gratitude for the land that we're on. You know, I'm very thankful that I get to live in Vermont. I actually live in Bennington, Vermont. And I want to acknowledge the original people, the native people of Vermont, who are the Abenaki. And the Abenaki have been systematically disenfranchised throughout the history of Vermont. And I encourage everyone, if you don't know about that history, to look into it. Look up the eugenics project that happened at the University of Vermont. Look up when Howard Dean was governor and the state of Vermont tried to say that the Abenaki didn't exist and make a legal argument against their existence. Study that, reach out to the local Abenaki people, make space for the fact that this land that we're on is unceded land, which means that there was never any treaty signed. There was never any even attempt to compensate or negotiate the occupation of this land. So I have incredible gratitude for this land, love for this land, but also I want to acknowledge the fact that I am not one of the original people of this land, and we can go a long way in Vermont to making peace with this place and the people who originated here. Okay, now today we're gonna go into 3 approaches to food justice and how they create more resilience in the face of climate instability. So I'm gonna speak first. I'm gonna talk about community engaged food studies, which is a project that I'm working on at Bennington College. So coming from the perspective of higher education and how can higher ed address food insecurity. Secondly, we'll have, I think these are out of order. I apologize for that. Because secondly, I think Conor Floyd is going to talk about farm to school and his work with Food Connects. And then thirdly, we're going to have Abel Luna, and he will be speaking about Milk with Dignity and farm worker organizing. So, community engaged food studies to address food insecurity in Bennington County, Vermont. This is the project that I'm engaged in. I was brought here to Bennington College to create a food studies program that works with the local community and kind of gets out of the tradition of college campuses being separate from their communities, which is a tradition that's existed for a while. So I'm a visiting faculty of food studies at Bennington College, and I just finished my first year. And what a year it's been. So I'm not seeing my images here. Maybe I just have to, oh yeah, okay. So I want to start out with, we're talking about climate change today. You might have heard from Bill McKibben or other experts. I just want to briefly make sure we're all on the same page, because that's the college professor in me. What is climate? Climate is the increase of CO2. On the left, we see the Mauna Loa curve, which tracks CO2 in the atmosphere going from 1960 to 2010. Carbon dioxide has increased rapidly beyond levels that we've ever seen in human existence on this planet. Similarly, if you look at the one on the right, this is a temperature. So as carbon dioxide is increased, temperature is increased as well. And this place on the far right-hand side around the 1900s is where you see a big leap in terms of temperature. And that tracks against this, this one on the left. So carbon dioxide and other similar greenhouse gases are increasing in the atmosphere, mostly due to the burning of fossil fuels. That's causing increase in climate. Climate is, of course, the average of temperature. So just the average temperature of our planet is getting warmer and warmer, and that has a huge cascade of effects across ecosystems. So, you know, our ecosystem as human beings is our agricultural system. Our agricultural system is how we get food. It's how we interact with our planet. It's the way that we feed ourselves in the same way that any other organism in its ecosystem has to procure food. And agriculture is our very sophisticated way of doing that. Climate change has measurable effects now and more in the future on every aspect of how we get food, including crops, livestock, and fisheries. One of the biggest aspects of climate change is increase in extreme weather events, such as floods, fires, droughts, and hurricanes. This can disrupt the agricultural system. This can destroy crops. This can devastate livestock, and also effects on fisheries in that same regard. As temperatures warm, we also have increased pest pressure, which is a big issue for crops especially. And we have reduced nutritional value of crops, and there's some interesting research on this that, you know, plants, when they are given a lot of CO2, they tend to get bigger, but as they get bigger, the actual nutritional value of those plants decreases. So that's an issue, especially for people who are undernourished. And so with these climate questions, we have justice questions. How will this disproportionately affect farm workers? All of these extreme weather events, increased pest pressure, which could lead to increased pesticide use. What's going to happen to those people out in the fields? How are they going to feel a disproportionate burden? People struggling with food insecurity, as we've seen with COVID, that, you know, the people on the margins who do not always have enough to eat when things get bad, their food security gets worse. So as these things happen, if the price of food goes up and that sort of thing, you know, disproportionate effects for food insecurity. And then lastly, future generations. One of the things to consider, I think, when we're looking at justice is like, what about the next generation, the generation after that, the generation after that? How are our decisions and our actions going to disproportionately affect people who maybe aren't even alive yet? So honing back in on the specific work that I do in terms of food justice. So I'm interested in this question of disproportionality and who's benefiting and who's carrying the burden. And the way that my current position addresses that is through looking at the town and county of Bennington, which has been called a food desert, which has some of the highest rates of food insecurity in the state of Vermont. And so as part of this, the Bennington College, where I work, they got a 3-year grant to create a new kind of academic program that directly addresses food insecurity. And this grant was done with a number of community partners. And so the main community partners at the onset of the grant, who are funded through this grant, in addition to Bennington College, our local hospital, Southern Vermont Medical Center, our local school district as well, and then the Greater Bennington Community Interfaith Services, or GBICS, which is the organization that runs the Kitchen Cupboard, which is our largest food shelf. So we started out with these 4 community partners, and then we've expanded over the course of the year. We're in year 1 of the grant, and we've expanded our community partners to folks like the Vermont Food Bank, the town of Bennington has come on board, the public health department in Bennington has come on board. So we've been expanding that network. So in terms of what I do, my teaching, I'm primarily a college professor. So I teach courses to college students. And the model that I use to do this is community engaged learning, which is also called service learning. Community engaged learning is the confluence of 3 things: community involvement. So organizations, identifying organizations and individuals that want to work with us, and they're engaged. We're learning about the community, we're interacting in the community. Practical experience, so whether this be practical experience putting in a garden, practical experience cooking food, practical experience presenting to a nonprofit organization, and then academic study. So we keep it academically rigorous. They're still writing papers, they're still doing research, they're still doing all of those things that you see in a traditional college classroom, in addition to these practical and community facets. And I'm just going to share 2 examples of things that we've done in the class. Like I said, it's year 1, so I'm learning as I go. But one class that I taught was called Gender and Agriculture, Market and Subsistence. And one of our things that we looked at was, what are these practices, these subsistence practices that people all around the world do that are not traditionally compensated in the capitalist economy, such as when you cook food for your family, when you grow food for your family, when you learn how to mend clothes, that these kinds of skills, fermentation, canning, these kinds of skills, they're not compensated, but they add something to the household. And we looked a lot into kind of the theory and philosophy around why these things aren't compensated, and what does it mean for a society when people no longer are able to do those tasks. So as we went through this class, we learned different skills. We practiced making fermented foods. We learned how to knit, and just kind of experimented with different things. And then the goal of the class was to take what we learned and share it. So at the food shelf, we did what we called a bread and spread workshop. We took butternut squash, which was abundant at the food shelf, and we did a cooking class where we turned that butternut squash into a maple squash spread. And then the students taught the folks in the class how to make bread from scratch using all ingredients that were available there at the food shelf. And then we shared a meal together of bread and butternut squash, and had a discussion about how to create more food sovereignty in our community. Another thing that we did this term, which unfortunately got a bit disrupted by the COVID crisis and having to send our students home, luckily we were able to mostly get this done, which was to do what's called a market basket study. We partnered with the health department in Bennington. They said, you know what? No one's done this market basket study in a while, which is something that comes out of the United States Department of Agriculture. It's a study of what the cost is and the availability of food in the town, food for purchase. So the students went to every store in the town, every gas station, convenience store, corner store, supermarket, everywhere that sold food and accepted SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise formerly known as food stamps. So they went everywhere that accepted SNAP, and they had a list from the USDA of what constitutes a healthy, affordable diet if you are getting assistance. And they went through and said how much do each of these foods cost and are they available. And then they presented the results of their study to the Bennington Hunger Council. So one of the things that was found was that the food that's walkable in the downtown is much more hard to get, much more expensive than the food that's in the larger supermarkets, which are only accessible by car, which led to a really great discussion, including folks from the town and folks from the Hunger Council and Health Department and the students about different ways to increase access through a path that's actually being created from downtown to the supermarkets. Working on a lot of new projects in response to COVID, but also just as this, as we wrap up year one, we've done a lot of conversations, a lot of learning, a lot of relationship building. And so some of the things that we're launching this summer include a gleaning partnership with the Vermont Food Bank. The Vermont Food Bank is going to be doing a gleaning pilot in Bennington to increase the amount of food coming from local farms going into local food banks. We're working with the Regenerative Food Network, which is a new marketing endeavor to try and create more markets for local farms. So taking some of the food out of our region to other places, and thus we have a problem of a saturated market in southeastern Vermont or southwestern Vermont. And so we're trying to address that market saturation so that more farms can come online and have places to sell their food. So that's a farmer livelihood project. And then another project that I'm working on in collaboration with the Robert Frost Stonehouse Museum is what we're calling Food Sovereignty Through Home Gardening, which includes free webinars on gardening, a lot of Q&A to answer people's garden questions, a community garden pilot program, which we're doing at 2 public housing complexes in Bennington to supply people with free tools and seeds and soil and everything they need to grow their own small garden. And then a Grow a Row program, which is a program that encourages avid home gardeners to grow a little extra in their gardens this year that can be donated. So just some of the key takeaways for this practice of community engaged learning that I do. I mean, the main aspect of it, and it's hard to see and it's hard to have clear numbers for, is just this work of relationship building. I can't stress how important this is. So much of what we do is conversations and getting to know people, and that's a process that takes a long time. And so you don't have quick turnarounds of amazing things that have been done. But those relationships that you're building, the hope is that they'll be the foundation of work that's truly meaningful and transformative, as opposed to work that just looks good on the surface. Another important part is not creating extra work for community partners. This is one of my main values in doing this work. I'm here as the college professor. My students are somewhat privileged in their ability to pursue a college education. We're not going out into the community asking for community organizations to give something to us. We're supposed to be in service to them. And so, you know, I do a lot of work with my students on how we speak with, communicate with community partners, such that we make sure that we're always in service to them and what we're doing, bringing benefit to them, and not as much the other way around. We don't want, they already are dealing with underfunding, burnout, etc. We don't want to add to that. Another piece of this is the learning objectives. So this is community engaged learning is not just volunteer work, because the students are supposed to be learning specific things through the process as part of a college education. So I work really hard on that aspect of it in the background. And then lastly, again, coming back to this point of a justice framework. So always working to contextualize what's happening in the vision for a just society. So it's not just about getting food to people, it's about what do we have to do to create a world in which people have a human right to food? What do we have to do to create a world in which land is accessible to everyone who wants to farm? These kind of bigger justice questions are always in the forefront of what we do. It's not just about the kind of feel-good volunteerism or which is really, it's an easy trap, especially around food security work, but more about the hard questions of how do we dismantle the systemic injustices that have made the situation what it is today. Okay, so that is all from me, and now I'm going to turn it over to Conor.
Great, thank you, Tatiana. So my name is Conor Floyd. I'm the Farm to School Program Manager at Food Connects. Food Connects is a nonprofit based in Brattleboro with a vision of healthy families, thriving farms, and connected communities. We have 2 main programs that are working to achieve this vision. There's the Food Hub, which works with local farmers and producers to get their products out to the community, serving southeastern Vermont, the Monadnock region of New Hampshire, and western Massachusetts. Some of our biggest buyers are hospitals, schools, and co-ops, making local items more widely available and more affordable. The Farm to School program works with schools throughout the region to increase local purchasing and school meal participation, as well as help teachers implement more farm, food, and nutrition education in their curriculum. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on the work Food Connects has done to increase food access in schools. We can jump to the next slide. So, in Farm to School, we have the 3 C's. There's classrooms, cafeterias, and communities. This means we're always thinking about how to incorporate Farm to School programming in each of these areas. But more importantly, we're also looking how to integrate them. It's at the areas of overlap where programming really thrives. What I like about this infographic is that it's highlighting some of the concrete activities area schools are doing to incorporate farm, food, and nutrition education. School gardens are thriving right now. More and more schools have cooking carts for students, and harvest dinners highlighting school-grown produce are becoming more common. But at the heart of it all is local food. Local food systems are better for the environment, they're important for local economies, and they're more resilient, as the pandemic has highlighted. But not everyone has the resources or ability to purchase local foods. This is neither the fault of the farmer for charging a fair price, nor the consumer who may not be paid a living wage. It's a systems problem. Farm to School is leveraging school districts and nutrition program budgets to buy more local and serve higher quality food. When there's more local food on the lunch tray, every student is able to participate in and benefit from our local food system. We can move to the next slide. So thinking about where we work, it's important to get an idea of the need that exists in our communities. I don't have up-to-date numbers that reflect the need today. I don't think anyone does. Coronavirus has highlighted the fragility in our current food system as well as those underserved by it. But with that disclaimer in mind, here's some of the most current data I have. The 3 Brattleboro town schools have an average free and reduced meals eligibility rate of just over 80%. Households making 185% or below the federal poverty line qualify. That's a household income of about $48,000 for a family of 4. Windham County has 8 schools serving universal free meals to students, and interest in the program is growing. And 1 in 6 children in Windham County are food insecure or lack access to enough food to fully meet basic needs at all times due to lack of financial resources. What all this means is that the need exists, but it's also likely underdocumented. Filling out government forms is an added burden on already busy parents, and asking for help feeding your family comes with stigma. Much of our work revolves around reducing that stigma and increasing access. We can go to the next slide. So I'd like to talk about briefly about 3 programs that are helping to reduce stigma within schools around accessing food. We have breakfast after the bell. Typically, students are given a choice when they arrive to school in the morning. They can either play with their friends outside or go to the cafeteria for breakfast. This sets up social barriers from the start of the day and creates an unfair either or choice for students. What kid isn't going to want to play with their friends when they get to school? Breakfast after the bell is allowing students to enjoy both by incorporating breakfast into the school day as a shared meal that the entire class participates in. This is increasing participation as well as reducing stigma in eating school breakfast. The Brattleboro town schools made the change to breakfast after the bell this past year, and the numbers speak for themselves. We've seen huge increases in participation across the board, with Academy School nearly doubling their numbers. Next, we have universal meals, which is where every child in the school eats for free, regardless of their socioeconomic status. There's 2 ways to get there, either through provision 2 or the community eligibility provision. Each uses its own formula to calculate what meals are reimbursed via the government. Both are fairly complicated. Food Connects helps schools achieve viability through enrollment campaigns and working with nutrition programs in grant writing, creating new systems, and dealing with regulations. For example, we're working with Windham Central Supervisory Union right now on an online application to increase the number of eligible families who are enrolling in free and reduced meals This will then increase the amount of money the school is reimbursed from the federal government. There's also currently a statewide push for universal meals, which is being led by Hunger Free Vermont. Then we have share tables. Students are required to select certain items for school lunch, but oftentimes they don't want to eat everything that's on their tray. Share tables or share coolers are communal spaces where children are encouraged to leave fruit, milk, yogurt, other items they don't want, which other students or staff can then grab if they're feeling hungry. This program encourages sharing, normalizes accessing additional food throughout the day, and is decreasing the amount of food waste we're seeing in schools. This program has also grown in tandem with Food Connect's focus on trauma-informed approaches to nutrition and farm-to-school programming. We can jump to the next slide. So a couple years back, thanks to funding from the Thompson Trust, my colleague Sheila began working on professional development, exploring this intersection between food and trauma. Food traditions can establish a strong sense of community, but food can also be a point of stress and anxiety for many students. Additionally, cafeterias are often the loudest, busiest, and most chaotic spaces in a school. This training encourages participants to think about their personal relationship with food, highlights student perspectives and experiences with school food, and makes recommendations of how trauma-responsive practices can be implemented. The training has been brought to the Brattleboro town schools, presented at the Massachusetts Farm to School Conference, and is being incorporated in a statewide professional development contract through the Agency of Education. Farm to School also helps close the opportunity gap for students and achieve these 4 universal growth needs that support resilience in students: belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. Hands-on cooking, nutrition, and gardening education in schools may be students' only opportunity to have these experiences. They help build context for classroom learning, allow students with diverse learning styles to thrive in settings other than at their desks, and build community and belonging with their classes through shared projects. And we can jump to the next slide. So oftentimes, Food Connect's role is to represent schools at events or meetings they don't have the capacity to attend themselves. Therefore, I'd like to briefly touch upon another important piece of the school food system and some success stories in our region. Overall, Windham County is a statewide leader in school meals when it comes to local purchasing and scratch cooking. On top of that, 2 districts have recently taken the leap into independently operated programs. We have Windham Northeast, which is in the Bellows Falls area, and Windham Central, which is in the Townsend area. Many districts contract out the work of school nutrition to food service management companies. Going independent means bringing the entire responsibility of feeding students back to the schools. It's not easy. Vermont is made up of mostly small school districts, which initially lack many of the systems needed. Oftentimes, schools need to commit additional financial resources to the nutrition program during the transition as well. This is a tough ask for districts which already have stretched budgets. It means there's a lot of work to be done from school districts and specifically the food service directors, but these programs have seen increases in meal quality and an investment in their staff. We've seen better pay for school nutrition professionals, staff becoming eligible for school benefits, a reintegration of school nutrition into school culture, therefore elevating their work, and school nutrition professionals doing more of what they love, cooking. This sector of care work in schools is oftentimes overlooked. It's important to celebrate the programs that are reversing nationwide trends of outsourcing labor and devaluing the work done in our schools' kitchens and cafeterias. I'd highly recommend the book, The Labor of Lunch, for folks who are interested in further exploring the history of school meals, its feminist and activist roots, and the labor movements occurring today. Then we can jump to the next slide. All right, and so lastly, I'd just like to touch upon Food Connect's response to COVID-19. The pandemic has brought a spotlight onto the importance of school meals, and our support to school meal programs has remained flexible throughout this time. The Windham Region Hunger Council consists of anti-hunger organizations throughout Windham and Windsor counties and became a forum for organizing a collective response. Food Connects helped spread information about new school meal programs via the group, while others focused on the needs of food shelves, how best to coordinate volunteers, and what our unified message was. Food Connects also stepped into a stronger community organizing role in partnership with the Windham Southeast School District, the Vermont Food Bank, FoodWorks, and local town staff to coordinate the Weekend Food Box program. This program identified a nutritional gap in the community of families not being served by other programs. The different organizations came together to work out how we could get additional relief to these families by leveraging existing systems. Counselors who already had relationships with families were the liaisons. FoodWorks used their relationship with the food bank to source food. Food Connects worked with the school to create the system of distribution to families and coordinate volunteer needs. And town staff help unload the food delivery every Wednesday in record time. The result of this program has been 120 families receiving consistent support over the past 2 months with food delivered right to their door. So food access is a crucial piece of Farm to School. Schools not only serve as a resource for students and families, but are the starting grounds for shifts in the way students think about and access food. Thank you for listening to some of the stories of our work. And I'm now going to turn it over to Abel with Migrant Justice.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. And we're going to be doing this. Yeah, thank you so much, Madeline. Yeah, Madeline, also with Migrant Justice, is behind the computer with helping us with the slides. So thank you, Maddie. Yeah, thank you, everyone. My name is Abel Nuna. I'm an organizer with Migrant Justice. And I'm really excited to be here. We're excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And we just want to start off by saying that we're in solidarity with the Black community in Vermont and across the country with everything that's happening. And yeah, it's important that we all are working together and supporting each other. And yeah, so to get a little bit into more of the Migrant Justice story, Migrant Justice, it's an organization. If you want to, yeah, switch it over, Matt, to the next slide. An organization that was funded or started by migrant farm workers and continues to be led by migrant farm workers that are milking cows here in the dairy farms in the state of Vermont. And part of the mission of Migrant Justice, well, not part of the mission of Migrant Justice, right, is to build the capacity and the voice and the power of the migrant community to transform the reality that people are facing on the farms. And yeah, and so if we go to the next slide, and it's important to understand a little bit about the dairy industry here in Vermont and some of the context. And for example, the dairy industry in Vermont, although a lot of people might think little barns and pretty hills and all of that. I mean, that is a lot of the time the picture that comes to mind when you think about Vermont, right? We have presentations where people sometimes think about ice cream or think about hills or the red barns and the pretty picture that Vermont, when you think about Vermont comes to mind, right? But then when you get to to really talk to workers and understand sort of how the dairy industry is being maintained and sustained, you understand that basically 80 to 90% of the dairy farms in Vermont are hiring migrant farm workers to milk the cows, right? So migrant farm workers are making sure that the dairy industry in Vermont keeps afloat or keeps basically exists, to put it in other words, maintaining and sustaining the dairy industry and some of the most famous brands, not just in Vermont but across the country as well, right? And here in Vermont, the dairy farm work is the kind of work that you do year round, and farm workers are living in the farms where they're working year round, 365 days a year, and which opens up, there's a lot of issues, with dynamics and all of that, right? And creates a lot of invisibility and for workers, farm workers in isolation, for workers that are working on the farms. Yeah, and so if we go to the next slide, Migrant Justice basically, it's an organization, that got started basically after the death of a young farm worker whose name was Jose Obed. Santis Cruz, who died on a work farm accident about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, he was strangled to death by the gutter scraper on a farm. He was working by himself on a night shift. It was winter, and his clothing got tangled in the chain, and he was strangled to death. A tragedy that could have been prevented if the right staffing or the right equipment had been in place. But that was the spark to the conversation here in Vermont, that there are migrant farm workers in dairy farms. And that's when the migrant community started to come together and to have meetings. And first it started in worker housing. Workers came together, family members of Jose Obed and other friends started to come together and talk about what had happened and to create a plan to sort of talk about this reality that people are facing. And eventually that evolved into what we now call community assemblies or community assemblies, which is safe spaces where the community comes together, migrant community comes together. It's all farm workers in a safe space. Sometimes it's a university room or a church space. And we talk about the issues that people are facing, and we talk about the reality that, that people are facing. And together we come up with a plan. What would it look like for the dairy industry, without this issue? And that is something that, that is sort of the heart and the recipe of success of migrant justice, is community assemblies, because that's where we sort of hear different things happening. And when we sort of, we make plans to take action and all of that, right? And all of our campaigns are born out of these conversations and spaces. And yeah, it's these spaces, for example, that we need to fight for a driver license in the state of Vermont, the Freedom for Movement, and that's how the fight for driver license came about. The fight for freedom from discrimination, working on a fair and impartial policing policy came out of the community assemblies and Meal Be Dignity, right? And so sort of that is how sort of migrant justice works. Sorry, if we go to the next slide, the dairy industry, it's also important to understand, why migrant justice works the way it does, because the dairy industry, it's marked with a bunch of human rights issues and human rights abuses and violations. There's a bunch of poverty, wages, issues with workers earning very little money, workers sometimes not being paid, being run off the farms without getting their money. Not in every single farm, but it happens, and we cannot ignore it when it happens. For example, workers are working 60 to 80 hours per week, and sometimes they have a day off per week, sometimes they do not have a day off per week, and the schedules are just really tough. And so that's something that, something that is happening in their industry. For example, their housing is sometimes in very bad conditions. There is farms and cases where there's 3 or 4 workers per room on a farm where there's 9 workers on a single house. So there is a lot of overcrowded housing and a high percentage of accidents due to chemical exposure or chemical related accidents. And not only that, but there's also, a lot of labor protections. For example, there's workers that have been exposed to sexual harassment, discrimination, unjust firing, and sometimes human trafficking. And so that's some of the reality of the dairy industry and the reason why migrant justice organizes the way that we do and the focus that we have, right, on human rights and labor. All of those issues are continue to happen and are happening. So if we move to the next slide, we're not just standing still and just crossing our arms. The community has been organizing, and one of the things that we have done since early 15, early 16 was try to understand, right? We did a survey and we learned about a lot of the different issues that are happening in their industry, we ask ourselves, what are we going to do, right, to work to try to tackle these issues, and what is the best way to do that? So we started to look for different models across the country, models of enforcement that really are worker-led and that really work. And so we came across the Coalition of Remotely Workers, and we've been working with them since, understanding the Fair Food Program and how it works, and everything about it. And really, based on the worker-driven social responsibility model, where corporations basically, they sign agreements with organizations, nonprofit organizations, to take responsibility for the human rights abuses in their supply chains. And so we learned about this model, and we understood it and brought it to the dairy industry, and put it in our context. Basically, what we're asking is that corporations sign an agreement with Migrant Justice, and what that means is that corporations agree to pay a premium to farms where they're buying their milk from, and to support farms because they're also struggling, but also that premium goes directly to improving workplace conditions or housing conditions or anything that needs to be improved, really. So, that money is coming directly from the corporation, and all of these sort of, the code of conduct and everything that is, it was defined by workers. And so that's what represents what dignity means, right? For workers in the Milk with Dignity program. And yeah, so basically, in order to achieve that, Migrant Justice also created a third party monitoring organization called the Milk with Dignity Standards Council, that is tasked, right, to making sure that they do audits in every single farm and talk to the workers themselves to make sure that these rights under the code are being met and complied with. And when there are not, there are consequences. Farms can be kicked out of the program and lose that premium, and the ability to sell their milk to Ben and Jerry's. And so the migrant community has created this, what we call the new day, right? And we have invited Ben and Jerry's to be the first corporation to sign the program. And so it was 3 years, after we defined the code of conduct and we defined exactly what is it that we wanted, what workers wanted to change, and what is it that we wanted to ask for exactly. We invited Ben and Jerry's to join the program, and it took almost 3 years to get them to sign the agreement. It wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, they understood, that they needed to take responsibility for human rights abuses in their supply chain. So on October 3rd, 2017, they signed the Milk with Dignity agreement, and it's been a historic moment for the dairy industry. Nothing like that has been done before. And 100% of the milk of the farms that are selling to Ben and Jerry's are under the program, covering over 300 workers, 20% of the dairy industry in Vermont, and also some farms in New York. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been redistributed from Ben and Jerry's passed down to workers. So more money in workers' pockets and also on farmers' pockets. And also, because of that, that premium, right? Because we understand the farmers are struggling as well, and in order to do that, we needed to take that into account. And so, things are working. The Milk with Dignity program, it's in the third year of implementation, and it's going great. Also one of the things that we're doing is education, and I think one of the it's really important, right? The education that we do under the Milk with Dignity program, because I was a farm worker myself, and I never received like a visit from the Department of Labor, or Department of Health, or Department of Housing, sort of saying, hey, like, what are your conditions like, right? And it's important that during the education we facilitate all of the rights to workers, and they get to understand their rights, they get to understand how to access their rights. And not only that, but farmers, farm workers, and managers, and other but English-speaking workers are also in the same space. So they all get to learn about their rights and responsibilities and what happens when there are human rights violations for those that violate, workers' rights, understand those consequences. And so, it's going great, and therefore, we continue to do surveys, and we understand that, Ben and Jerry's is 60 or around that amount of farms, and there's a lot of farms that are still left out of the program. And for that, we continue to do the work. We continue to do surveys, and one of the things that we're doing now is that we're expanding the program, and that we're asking, we've been doing a bunch of research to understand which company do we ask, to join the program next and be a champion in human rights. And after a month of research, the community, migrant community, are inviting Hannaford's to join the Milk with Dignity program. Hannaford's, they are an important buyer of milk in the Northeast. They have about 200 stores in the Northeast, and they buy a bunch of milk from Vermont and other states in our area. And so, at the same time, their mother company, which is the Ahold Delhaize, they're benefiting from the whole COVID-19 situation. They're making, billions of dollars a week, not even, they're billions of dollars. And so workers continue to work longer hours. Workers are continued to work under the same conditions, even worse now because there's the equipment is going, it's pretty low. Like there's no PPE for workers. And so we're asking Hannaford to really take responsibility for the human rights abuses in their supply chain and join the program. And if, that will have a huge impact on the dairy industry in Vermont, but also in other states across the Northeast. And also hundreds of workers will be impacted. And so that is some of the work that we are doing, to continue to tackle the question, right, about, dignity and access sort of to all of the different questions that we're asking ourselves. And, for us is where is the money at? Where is, at the end of the day, where is the money and who's benefiting from all the labor, of our community? And it's the big companies, big corporations, and we cannot let them off the hook, as COVID-19 is happening. And, we need to be thinking about how corporations play, what is the responsibility as they continue to get rich and our communities continue to fight for the scraps that they continue to give us. And so that's why we're calling on them, on corporations to join the program. Yep. And there's our information. Feel free to look us up on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, there might be coming up events and some other things. So we'll keep you posted. If you sign up on our email list and all of that, you can get it both through our webpage. Yep.
Thanks so much. I'll turn it over. Well, actually, before I turn it over to Jen, just want to quickly thank Abel and Conor, and also, one of the things that did pop up in the Q&A while we were talking was about COVID specifically and how that affects our work. I know for my work in particular, the fact that I mobilize college students to do community work, it's gotten pretty, our college students were sent home. So they've been having to try to figure out ways to do service work online. We have the summer off from school, so hopefully in the fall they'll be able to come back. If not, we'll just keep finding ways to be of service to our community in online capacities, which can be done by doing kind of traditional research and reporting back things that, but we hope that we can get back into a hands-on capacity soon. I know that Conor, you talked about COVID. Abel, do you have anything you'd like to say about migrant justice and your response to COVID, or how things have changed?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. One of the things, and it's important, right, to understand sort of, what does this moment mean for farm workers, as sort of the government is saying you're essential, but yet we cannot give you not even the economic support, and also we cannot support you in any way, but continue to do the work. You get sick, but and that's sort of how the community feels, that we've been sort of left out and abandoned, and that there's no support for the migrant community. And one of the things that we're doing is for example, to sort of step back a little bit, as the government is also calling, stay home and sort of keep safe and keep sort of 6 feet away. That is something that farm workers cannot do on the farms, because, for example, you have to be milking right next to somebody else. of the overcrowding conditions, like I mentioned. Those are some of the conditions that people are facing, and it was there before the crisis, the COVID-19 sort of hit, Vermont and their industry in the U.S. But it will continue to be there, and now it's just getting worse. And one of the things that we're doing, for example, is we're asking the state of Vermont to sort of rectify the mistake that the federal government did by excluding farm workers and migrant communities, not just farm workers, but migrant communities, across the country. And we're asking Vermont to create a relief fund, basically to issue payments to migrant communities, migrant farm workers, and other communities, that are here in Vermont, that are, sustaining Vermont's economy, and we've been excluded. And that includes, the $1,200 per adult and $500 per children. And community, for example, if you're a U.S. and you're married to somebody that doesn't have a social security number, we're asking that everybody sort of gets what everybody else has been getting. And so far there is, there hasn't been much movement from the Vermont State House, although we pushed a lot, and sort of tried to get them to understand, that we need to be recognized, but sort of it's taking some time. So yeah, we're thinking about sort of, continue to keep pressure and building pressure to get them to understand that this is something that they need to do for, for the people that are sustaining their industry here in Vermont. We continue to do education with migrant community. I think that's one of the things that we continue to do. But yeah, that's what we have been doing.
So I just want to say thank you to all the panelists once again. The coordinated effort was fantastic, and it's just so interesting to see all the different ways that you can tackle food insecurity and food justice in one tiny state, right? There's like such vastly different ways that Tatiana, Conor, and Ibel are tackling this, and they all, it goes to the same effort. I do want to say thank you, Tatiana, for, as an Indigenous person, for bringing up Indigenous folks native to Vermont. That's, always something I love to hear. It's been such an awesome theme throughout the conference so far. So I just want to say I appreciate that. And, Ibel is my Indigenous cousin to the south. So also shout out to you as well. I also think it's so fascinating that I grew up in Vermont in Addison County. I'm in Brooklyn now, but I didn't even know there were migrant farm workers when I was growing up in the middle of farmland. And I think that was just such a crazy thing. And, of course, very much know that now. But it's just so fascinating, like how well that was hidden from me in literally my backyard. So anyway, I'm really glad that there's a platform and a voice now for the migrant workers. And so it's just an exciting time to be alive right now. And we do have some questions, and I will let Lissa take it away on the questions right now.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jen. Anne Bransfield is asking, she has a comment and a question. Each of the presentations were fantastic, and I wondered if the slide presentations will be accessible to summit participants. That's something we've done with other speakers. So if our panelists today are willing to share their slide presentations, we can get it out to all the attendees. Next question. I wonder if Conor could talk just a little about Food Connect's Food Hub and how that got its start.
Yeah, I will do my best. I hope to not misrepresent the history there, because it's been about 10 years now in the making. Food Connects originally came out of an organization called Post Oil Solutions. And the original main program was the Farm to School program. It then took over Windham Farm and Food and begun the Food Hub, which really started pretty small in the past 3 or so years. There's been a ton of growth. Since the past year, we moved to a new space where the Vermont Food Bank is, and against the grain over behind Agway. And with that space, we've been able to build a 1,000 square foot cooler and freezer. We have better docking space. And with the, with coronavirus and the instability in the larger food chains, interest in local food has kind of skyrocketed, and the Food Hub has seen almost a quadrupling of interest. You know, what they did in sales in 1 week this past April, they did in the whole month of April in 2019. So interest has really grown with that. But so it started fairly small. You know, they used to be operating out of Harlow Farm that lent them some space, and we finally been able to move into a space of our own. And with the Food Hub, it's that nonprofit model. So they're trying to keep things as affordable as possible for both consumers and the producers. And so that means there's lower overhead fees, there's lower minimums, both for sellers and buyers. And then there's also just like a lot more flexibility when it comes to delivery schedules and, you know, how much product you have to be moving through the Food Hub to be able to be a part of the system and get access to all of these different, like I said, co-ops, hospitals. There's some direct to consumer happening as well now. So it's been a long time in the making, but also in the past 3 years or so, there's been a lot of exponential growth, which is really exciting.
Thank you, Conor. Our next question is from Dorian Nunez, Dorian was one of our, I would say he was the life of the party at our virtual happy hour that we had last Friday. So hello, good to see you, Dorian. He's asking if we can also get contact information from the speakers. And I think as long as our speakers are good with sharing that, we can also get that out to all our attendees with the presentations as well.
Yeah. And I'll just add a little context as well. Dorian is in Louisiana, he's in New Orleans. And he is trying to start some sort of similar food hub in New Orleans as well, and some you know, some farming down there that he, you know, that's, I guess it's pretty underutilized land. So he, you know, is very connected in that way. So just to start some context, he's not just trying to hang out with you guys.
Yeah, on the presentation, which I'm happy to share as long as Conor's okay with it, because his slide's okay. The presentation, which I'm happy to share for y'all to make public, there's a slide on there at the end that I didn't end up showing, but it has my email address. It has the information if you want to just sign up for the newsletter for the Center for the Advancement for Public Action, where I do all my work out of at Bennington College. It also has Conor's email address, the website for Migrant Justice. So in that presentation is a great place to find where to learn more.
Cool, and I'm happy to do the last question that we have here for now. All right, this is a good one, and I think that we can actually, each of you can tackle this in a different way. So I will start with Tatiana asking you, does the current push towards, and this is from Orly Munzing, she is the original founder, so I'm so glad that she's here and joining us today. It's very exciting to have her along. Hopefully she's liking the work that we're doing as well. And she asked, does the current push towards green technologies overshadow the need to focus on equity and social justice in the fight against climate change?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, it's not a simple yes or no answer. There are a lot of companies that are doing really well with green technologies. And if green technologies continue to be pursued and funded in the current social structure that we have, which is rife with inequity, then yeah, it's going to exacerbate these issues. Right now, you know, folks, for example, in Vermont, folks who are homeowners who have good credit can get loans out to get solar panels on their house that can end up to be their loan payments pretty much equal to what they would pay for the regular electric bill. So wonderful, great program, but if you are not a homeowner or if you don't have good credit, you're excluded from that program. And this is a thing that we see with around local food, around organic food, and we see it with alternative energy too, that it's kind of you get the morality, you get to be the moral right, you know, person when you have the money to pay for it. And that's really not the way morality should work. We need to do more to make access to alternative energy for people who are renting we need to do more to make sure that we are creating jobs and creating diversity within those workforces, and not just allowing the folks who have money, who have funds to go ahead and start solar companies, but instead right some of those wrongs in the past. And so I'm very excited by a lot of the Green New Deal proposals that have been coming out around this idea of how we can use alternative energy as a lever to create a more equitable society. Because if we don't have that justice lens, then we will just go ahead and create all of those injustices all over again with renewable energy. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And Conor, what do you think?
Yeah, so building off of what Tatiana was saying, I think it does require just more work to be done, right? If you're trying to be all inclusive with everyone as you're moving forward with climate justice, it does mean maybe going a little bit slower and making sure that you're able to take everyone along with you. Looking specifically at schools, I think the youth that are currently in schools and high school environmental groups are a great example of students today are much more interested in that intersection. And so I think they get this. You know, we've seen even local students have some really powerful words just shared with the public recently. And so when we're looking at like the next generation that's coming up, those students really get it, and I think have a much sharper focus on how it's important to look at the bigger picture and not really kind of try to be pulling out just the things that are easiest, because all of these problems are really difficult. But yeah, they're just going to keep coming up if you're not addressing the entire situation.
Oops, I was muted. Abel, do you have any thoughts on this?
It's a really good question. Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, I guess for us, more like about like, I mean, you know, the climate justice, right, piece. It's sort of, it's set in with migration, right? You know, and our analysis, for example, right? It's more of like, you know, our communities, right? Ideally, we would like to, you know, to stay in Mexico or whatever sort of communities we came from, right? I don't think like nobody wants to be milking cows in negative 20-degree weather in Vermont, and I think for us has to do more with that, right? Like, you know, sort of like the U.S. and the policies that they're implementing and that they have when they talk about like sort of we're gonna have like this New Deal or whatever it is, right? What does it mean really for, you know, for the communities of color, the communities that are more disenfranchised, the communities that don't have a seat at the table? How does that impact, right, those people? And for us, that's sort of the analysis, and that is some of the cause of migration. That is why we're here. That is why our communities sort of end up in Vermont, and sort of, you know, when we end up in Vermont, the same system that kicks you out from your house, from your country, turns into a criminal, right? Now that you don't have a paper that says welcome to the United States, all of a sudden you're persecuted, you're hunted, and you're, you know, incarcerated, not hunted, but incarcerated and persecuted until, you know, in family separation, and you know, but at the same time you're needed to keep the dairy industry afloat. And so, you know, I think for us it's more about that, and yeah, like yeah, that's sort of how are we thinking about it, and yeah, what does it mean for the people, right? Like at the end of the day, for the communities that are most impacted, and you know, those communities have a voice at the table and in the decision making. Yeah.
It's complicated, and you know, I don't expect anyone to answer it today because we have people who are experts who can't answer these questions. But is there any way, about just to follow up, that folks from your community have been able to bring any of the ideas that you're seeing in the United States back to your home countries? And you could just say no.
I don't understand the question that well, sorry.
Yeah, it just any sort of ways that you see, like farming techniques, like being able to use more green technology? Have you been able to use any of those ideas that you learned here and to be able to bring some of those like farming practices back to your own countries?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. And yeah, I don't think we know much about that. Yeah, once people sort of go back home, yeah.
You don't want to farm anymore, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do. And I think, well, and also, I mean, it's important to understand, right? For example, we come from communities, for example, where like we grow local food and organic, and we're used to that. And when we come here, I mean, all of that changes the diet and everything. And so I think when people are used to like farming and doing this work, and sort of, people are doing milking cows also back home, and they love it when they do here, but not with all the injustices. And I think when people leave Vermont, they sometimes they go back and continue to do that work that they were doing before. Yeah, and so I don't think, so we're not really sure.
Opposite, like you have better practices there, then maybe you're able to eat better and all those sorts of things than you are here. That's very interesting. I never would have thought that. All right, I think there's another question here. Okay, it's just a follow-up kind of to the last question. Orly again says, so how can we avoid pitfalls of social inequity while understanding the development of green infrastructure? Anybody who wants to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the pitfalls of inequity are around how things, one of the primary ways is how things are funded. Often the people who are getting access to funds that come through federal or state agencies for green energy are the people who are already in privileged positions. As opposed to, it takes a lot more work, kind of almost similar to what Conor was saying about the food service agencies, that there's a lot of upfront work that has to be done in order to, and investment of extra money in order to make it more equitable. So something that I would think about is like, okay, well, in the state of Vermont, that, we've done some work to give some human rights to our migrant neighbors, but not much. They're still not being treated as full citizens. And so for the children of migrant workers to be fully treated as full citizens through the law, to be able to have the same access to education, the same access to healthcare, the same access to a future in Vermont, and to be part of the full members of the state of Vermont, and then, making sure that equity exists right from the beginning, right from birth, and then through education, and saying like things like, if you're going to get money for your alternative energy company, you have to hire a certain amount, you have to have a diverse workforce, that kind of, those kind of laws, they're often, a lot of them have been rebuked in recent years. You have to do extra work in order to make up for the lack of equity. It means, giving free alternative energy to Abenaki people as part of an apology for what the government of Vermont did in the 90s. To try and legislate out their existence. It means apologizing to Black Vermonters who have faced, a higher rate of incarceration than, in the state compared to white Vermonters. There's apologies and there's work that has to be done to start, and that means putting the resources there to those individuals, to those communities, our migrant brothers and sisters, people of color, indigenous people, that those people, they need, they deserve an apology. They deserve some of the resources that have been extracted from them. When we're talking about migrant labor, we're talking about human beings whose labor and lives have been used in order to maintain this bucolic farm landscape that we love so much in Vermont. We've put that on the bodies of people who are refugees. I mean, we should, as a community of Vermont, we should be welcoming refugees. We should be giving love and support to refugees. We shouldn't be using their bodies and their lives in order to benefit. So we need to do the opposite, which is going to feel uncomfortable. That means that a solar company might not get the money that it thinks it's going to get, or that it might come with a lot of restrictions as to how they can use it.
Yeah, so I guess a personal follow-up question to that is, you can have all these diversity initiatives, but if the people aren't there to work the jobs, I mean, there's a couple different things there. One is a lot of young people have left Vermont, sort of in record numbers. We don't necessarily have the right age workforce, or the diversity, or the people who have the skills. So like, how do you come at it from different angles? Or what's your thoughts around that? Like, I'm, again, not asking you to solve anything, but just kind of like thoughts around that, and anyone can jump in on that.
I'll just speak very briefly because I kind of got up on my soapbox there for a minute and I want to let the other panelists speak. But I would just say that we have in places like Vermont and rural places throughout the United States, we have a lot of hidden diversity. Like you were saying, Jen, how you didn't even know there were migrant workers there. We have a lot of people of color behind bars in the state. We have a lot of people of color undocumented working in farms. And so I think the first step is to start, we have, an indigenous population. So we need to start by kind of dismantling this narrative of Vermont as a white state, because that has been, that's a narrative that others people, and it makes people invisible. So we have to start by saying, like, here's all the diversity that exists, and then we're going to do what we can to build this diversity, to love and cherish this diversity.
I can jump in with a little bit more, but just the thought that, right, diverse and equitable systems are also more stable. Again, we're seeing this with COVID-19, whether we're looking at food chains, and the smaller, more diverse, more connected food chains were the ones that were more stable and reliable through this. Right, looking at our inequitable healthcare system and how that has had a huge negative impact on the spread of COVID-19 in America. And so when we're thinking about Vermont and how do we make Vermont a attractive, livable, and workable state for everyone, again, while there may be there will be more upfront costs and it will take more work in the beginning. When you're looking at long-term returns and the well-being of everyone, moving with the goal of a diverse and equitable system, regardless of what we're looking at, whether that's healthcare, food systems, climate justice, that seems to be generally the right way to move forward with that.
Abel, again, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts around this?
No, I agree with what Conor and Tatiana have mentioned. Yeah, and I guess, one thing that we'll, continue to do is, again, sort of, for farm workers, is that specifically sort of our area and what we do, is sort of to continue to push that conversation, right? That companies need to take responsibility for the human rights abuses, as they're talking about, like, yeah, we're, implementing new green technology, or we're doing this, or we're doing that. How is it affecting people? And so I think it's important just to have, systematically, people of color have been left out of the table in every conversation or any conversation, and just, a bunch of, white people that make decisions inside a room. And I think it's important to change that, but in echoing what everybody's saying. Yeah,
it's a good point. Just having the voices at the table is so important. I think it's been very much highlighted in the past few weeks, how important that is. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Lisa? I'm sorry, it looked like you were.
Yeah, I just wanted to, full disclosure, when we had decided we were going to offer this panel and then also our BIPOC Farm Tour panel for free to anybody who wanted to join, we reached out to all of our speakers and just to make sure that they were okay with that. And Tatiana's first response to me was, that's great, but do you have revenue to put behind it? Do you have some money to put behind this to help out farmers, BIPOC farmers? And I just want to, I think when we talk about these things, and Tatiana touched on this, and Conor touched on this, and Abel touched on this, we are talking about revenue, about money, about making sure that the wealth is dispersed in a way that creates the equity that we're talking about. And, I know that that's something that we are definitely, we're applying for grants so that we can try to put that money, put our money where our mouth is, right? I really felt like it was important to call that out too. And thank you again, Tatiana, for really putting that out in the forefront for us to be thinking about.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I had a question for Conor, if I can jump in here. Conor, earlier in your presentation, you showed a slide of the farm to school programs around the state. And it seemed like there were a number of counties that didn't have any programs. And I was wondering, is this a statewide effort? Is it a local effort? Is there an effort to fill those gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's the Vermont Farm to School Network, which is a collaboration of statewide partners working towards farm to school initiatives. In addition to that, there are these different regional farm to school providers, which provide a lot of coverage to the state, but there are definitely places where there isn't the as much intensive services as Food Connects is able to provide to the southeastern corner of Vermont. Vermont Feed, which is Vermont Food Education Every Day, is kind of that larger umbrella. And so if there is a school or district that's interested in getting more involved, but they might not have a direct contact, reaching out to Vermont Feed, which is a partnership between Shelburne Farms and NOFA Vermont, is kind of like their first step in that direction. But there are definitely differences throughout the state in terms of how much accessibility and support exists. We even experienced that being a organization headquartered in Brattleboro, and really trying to serve Springfield, right, or Londonderry as best as possible. That geography makes it tough. We were able to jump really quickly into the community in the Brattleboro area because there was a very robust response. We had those community connections. But it's much harder to have that like 10-minute conversation when you have to drive 45 minutes one way to go have that 10-minute conversation. So there are still some accessibility issues that we're trying to figure out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I actually have one more question for Conor. I actually have a question for Conor and then a question for Tatiana, if that's okay. Conor, if a school wanted to get involved in the farm to school program, in terms of either starting a school garden or incorporating some of that into the curriculum or the everyday lives of the kids, who would they reach out to? You? Is that the person, the first point of contact?
Yeah. So they could either email me, they could go to foodconnects.org, and we have more information about what getting involved looks like. Again, talking about money, we have a mix of foundation grants, more of these specific state contracts, and then member schools that are putting a small piece of their school budget towards this collaboration as well. And so then it's just working one-on-one with those schools to figure out what that best fit is. But yeah, reaching out either via email or checking out our website is that best first step. Thanks for that pitch.
No problem. And then Tatiana, when you were talking about the help that you're doing in getting farms to sell more online, I was curious, are you seeing a real uptick in that since COVID?
Yeah, I did a webinar a couple of weeks back with a panel of local farmers so that folks could hear from them. And similar to what Conor was saying, there is an increase. A lot of CSAs have sold out. A lot of farms that are doing local food have seen an increase in desire for their food. And I think one of the challenges for farms is that the farms, it just depends on the farm's model. So the farms that have been primarily selling like higher end and with restaurants as their clients have been some real financial difficulties around that. So it kind of depends. The CSA farms, the vegetable farms, are doing especially well because there's food security that comes with a CSA. You pay it at the beginning of the year, you have guaranteed food and vegetables coming in. And so, yeah, in terms of the Regenerative Food Network specifically, that is still in the planning stages, so it hasn't quite launched yet. But Food Connects is one of the partners working with the Regenerative Food Network, and the idea is to network with Food Connects, food hub project that's starting in Bennington, the Vermont, I can't remember the name of it, in Rutland, the food hub in Rutland, I'll call it. Sorry if anyone from there is on, that I'm spacing your name. And to start this work of kind of networking these together, because what we have here in southwestern Vermont is that we have market saturation. We have lots of people who'd like to farm, and we actually have land available through conservation, land conservation programs, but there's a hesitancy into bringing more farms online because where are they going to sell to? The farmers market is full. Farms can't get in there, you know, so we need to figure out new ways for people to, farmers to sell their food.
I have a little follow-up comment question about that. So I followed food systems are my passion anyway, just in my regular life. And so I follow like a lot of different food websites, CSA kind of things. And there's one that I get emails from all the time, and it's sort of like a higher end group, and they were selling one box of CSA items of, you know, sort of specialty things, and it wasn't anything too crazy. I mean, they kind of said what they had in it. One box, not the whole season, for $175 a person, and it was
1 week, one box. Yeah.
And I was just like, and so I'm kind of, I guess my question is, and that's, I believe that was from upstate New York, where that farm was, and you know, it was kind of speaking to the folks who.
Oh, was it Essex Farm?
I'm not positive. I can go back and look in my email.
Because if it was that farm in particular, is their box is a full diet, so it's supposed to that I can't remember their pricing though, but it's supposed to be like everything you would.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And there was multiple of those. It wasn't just the one, but it was multiple that were along those like price lines. And it was like Jerusalem artichoke, which isn't that crazy of a product, and like spinach and like things that weren't that expensive. So a couple things, like, how do you make sure that the farmers are making the money that they had? How do you keep stuff local, right? Like, because people in Brooklyn and people in Manhattan will pay those prices. So then there's people who are going hungry in local areas. So like, I do know if anything's being done about that. I know, speaking to some other folks on other panels, there's been some conversation about thoughts on how to do things, but what's happening?
Yeah, I can say that, you know, some of the, if it is Essex Farm, that's a farm that I've actually worked there. So full disclosure, they do a full diet CSA. So the idea is that they're really trying to replace the store. So they're looking at what it would cost if you went to the grocery store and shopped for a family for 1 week, and you're buying organic. Yeah, the cost. I think the cost is a huge issue. There's a few ways that things that I'm seeing that are doing an especially good job. One, Soulfire Farm in New York. They're an incredible farm that does a lot of social justice work, a lot of education, really an inspiration for all of us working in this field. And they do a sliding scale CSA. So they make the scale sliding such that if you are on, if you qualify for a nutrition assistance SNAP, your SNAP can pay for that week's of box of CSA box, and which is less than what the farm needs, but then they get other people who agree with their mission to buy the CSA shares for more than they're worth. And so that sliding scale model, there's been like restaurants that have been working on that. There's a place in, I believe in Raleigh, North Carolina, called A Place at the Table, a restaurant where folks can come in, and they've created a culture of people buying chips, that little wooden chips that you can give to other people for free food. So I think this is the community aspect of it, that, you know, not everyone can afford this food. And so for the people who can afford it, they have an obligation to pay a little bit more. There's a lot being done around gleaning. So with gleaning, there's, and Zach Herbert, who I think I saw on the list of participants here from the Vermont Food Bank as the gleaning coordinator for Windham and Bennington County. They collect food that cannot be harvested from farms because there's just not a market for it, or the farm has just, made a choice. And so they'll bring in volunteers to collect that food and donate it. So in terms of free food that's available for people, we're working on that aspect. And more needs to be done with sliding scale. More needs to be done with kind of figuring out ways of kind of getting buy-in from folks to pay a little more in order to subsidize other people being able to pay less. But it takes, one of the things I study is resiliency, and it takes redundancy for a system to really be resilient. Redundancy means that there's many food banks, there's many gardens, there's many CSAs, there's a lot of different models in operation, that sort of diversity, such that anyone who wants local food can have access to it at whatever price point they can afford, or no price at all.
I know we're over time. Can I jump on with a little bit extra to that question as well? Because Food Connects has kind of been working with our partners as well, looking at how to connect different local food hubs and supply chains and kind of move food to where it needs to go while keeping it local. And of course, this opens up that big question of what is local. And there's a lot of farm to school meetings that's grappling with that very question. But for example, there's not like large scale onion growing over here in Brattleboro, but the Hudson Valley has a lot of onions. So it's, thinking about how are we able to leverage the food hub collaboratives and all of our different partners to maybe get those onions from the Hudson Valley up to the Northeast Kingdom, while still keeping them within these local economies, local supply chains, and not having to broaden it out to those large multinational corporations. The other thought is just, again, going back to when we're thinking about keeping it accessible, that's where the cafeteria always comes for me. If we're able to get local food into the cafeteria, a lot of kids are eating breakfast, lunch, and either like an after school snack or dinner at school 5 days a week. So, that's a ton of their weekly nutrition happening in the school. So if we're able to get more local food there and make it profitable for farmers and affordable for schools, then that's going to make a huge change. Again, just pulling from our examples, the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union, they're serving 100% local beef to all their students whenever they're serving beef. Their pizzas are made from scratch, like scratch dough every time they're making it. So it's possible, it's happening in our region. And I think that's where it kind of like all comes together for me. And it's like elevating all of our local farmers and producers, making sure they're being paid a fair wage, but also making sure that no one in our community is being left behind in this movement.
And I guess, I wanted to just share, it's really an important conversation, as we're talking about like food and sort of how do we bring more like local and organic food to schools, and, at the same time, and this is sort of like, why we do the work that we do, right? Because, it's important to continue to keep in mind, right? Who's producing that food, right? Who's milking the cows? I was one of the onion pickers down in the Hudson Valley. Actually, that's the area where I was working when I was between 13 and 16 years old. And, what does it mean for those workers if we start moving onions from there to here, right? Like, what does that mean for the people that are working, the land, and the people that are sort of breaking their backs? And at the end of the day, right, we want to make sure that we have a better food system and a more sustainable food system, right? I think that's what we all want, but a sustainable food system cannot happen, and we cannot have one without having a workforce that we respected and that is also sustainable and human rights and free from human rights abuses. Until then, we can't say we have local and we have organic, and we need to be thinking about that, and that is sort of a an important conversation that we keep raising in Vermont, right? Vermont is a huge state about like local and organic and foodies, right? But for many times, workers have been included out of that conversation, and now it's sort of like other organizations that are doing this work. How can we all come together and make sure we push, right? to support the work that we are each doing to make sure that we create that sustainable food system that we want.
Thanks, that's a really excellent point. I just want to say thank you one last time. We do unfortunately have to wrap it up, but folks have put their information in the chat, and if you want to get a hold of anybody, as long as it's okay with the panelists, I'm happy to pass that along as well. Yeah, and thank you everybody. We have another really great panel coming up in about half an hour, and it's Ben and Jerry's, so there's been some really funny memes about Ben and Jerry's reaction to the Black Lives Matter. I won't share them publicly, but you can look them up, and I will let Lisa say some parting words before we go.
Sure. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Belle. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Conor. Thank you, Madeline, behind the scenes, for putting together this excellent panel, and we're grateful to all of you. Thank you to Jen. I do just want to end by saying that it is Jen Brandt's birthday today, so join me in wishing her a very happy birthday. We love you, Jen. So come back for Ben and Jerry's. It's going to be a great talk. Thank you all.